"You'll never survive without me." Funny how 5 simple words can ignite such a powerful fire. Marcus said them so casually, tossing them across his mahogany desk along with the divorce papers on our 15th wedding anniversary. He was right about one thing: the woman he married didn't survive. Instead, she transformed into someone who would not only survive but thrive, someone who would eventually stare back at him from the cover of Forbes while he watched from his studio apartment. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Of all the ways to spend your 15th wedding anniversary, finding divorce papers in your husband's home office wasn't exactly what I had planned. I'd spent the morning preparing his favorite meal, setting the table with our best china, even wearing the pearl necklace he'd given me on our 10th anniversary. But there they were, tucked inside his leather portfolio, already signed with post-it notes marking where I should add my signature to dissolve our marriage. I remembered the day we met in college, Marcus striding into Economics 101, commanding attention with his charismatic smile and ambitious plans. I was studying engineering then, but he convinced me business would be more suitable. "You're too pretty to waste your time with circuits and calculations," he'd said. I switched majors the next semester, believing his vision of our future was better than mine. 15 years later, that future had become a carefully constructed cage. The mansion in the prestigious neighborhood, the country club memberships, the charity gala committees, all of it designed to keep me occupied while he built his empire. "Running a household is like running a small business," he'd say, patting my hand condescendingly at dinner parties. "And you do it so well, darling." When he found me in his office staring at the divorce papers, he didn't even have the decency to look surprised. "Ah," he said, loosening his Italian silk tie, "I see you found them. I was going to tell you over dinner." "On our anniversary?" My voice sounded distant, unfamiliar. He shrugged, the gesture elegant even in its cruelty. "There's someone else, younger, more ambitious. She understands the business world better." He paused, studying me like one of his investment prospects. "Let's be honest, Claire. You haven't worked in 15 years. You don't understand finance or business. The kindest thing I can do is give you a generous settlement." That's when I noticed the second set of papers. A settlement agreement that would leave me comfortable but dependent, just as I'd always been. My signature would guarantee me a life of modest comfort and absolute irrelevance. "You should be grateful," he continued, his tone suggesting he was doing me a favor. "Most men wouldn't be this generous." I looked around his office at the walls lined with his achievements, the business awards, the magazine features, the photos of him shaking hands with industry leaders. Not a single photo of us together. Not a single reminder that I'd spent 15 years supporting his dreams while burying my own. That night, as I packed my belongings into carefully labeled boxes, I found my old college notebooks from my engineering days. Complex circuit diagrams and innovative designs filled the margins, dreams I'd set aside to become Mrs. Marcus Sterling. I ran my fingers over the faded sketches, remembering the girl who once believed she could change the world through technology. As I loaded my boxes into my car, heading toward an uncertain future, something shifted inside me. The perfectly polished trophy wife was indeed dying, but from her ashes, someone else was emerging. Someone who remembered her love for circuits and calculations. Someone who had 15 years of watching a business empire grow from the inside. Someone who was about to prove that being underestimated could be the greatest advantage of all. Little did Marcus know, watching me drive away from our mansion, that the next time he'd see me wouldn't be at a divorce court or a charity gala. It would be on the cover of Forbes, my success story splashed across the very magazine he read religiously. But first, I had to remember who I was before I became his wife, and more importantly, discover who I could become without him. Amazing how quickly you can go from hosting charity galas to being unable to get a job at the local coffee shop. Overqualified yet underexperienced became my daily rejection mantra. My impressive resume, 15 years of managing household staff, organizing million-dollar fundraisers, and networking with the city's elite, meant nothing in the real world. The irony wasn't lost on me that I could plan a perfect dinner party for a tech CEO, but couldn't get hired as their receptionist. My new apartment was a far cry from our mansion, a one-bedroom walk-up where the hot water was more suggestion than reality, and the furniture consisted of whatever Marcus had deemed too beneath him to fight for in the divorce. I'd gone from a walk-in closet bigger than this entire apartment to hanging my designer clothes, the ones I hadn't sold yet, on a rickety rack from Target. The settlement money wouldn't last long, I knew that. Marcus had made sure it was just enough to keep me comfortable if I lived modestly, but not enough to start over properly. Think of it as motivation to remarry well, he'd said during our last meeting, his new girlfriend's diamond ring catching the light as she waited in his car. It was during one of my many failed job interviews that I ran into Dr. Sarah Chen. I almost didn't recognize her. My former engineering professor had aged gracefully over the past 15 years, unlike my carefully preserved but increasingly brittle self-image. "Claire Matthews," she said, using my maiden name as if the past 15 years had never happened. "I was just reading about your husband's company's latest acquisition." She paused, studying my face. "Though I suppose you're not interested in discussing Marcus Sterling's successes right now." We ended up at a coffee shop where I'd been rejected for a barista position just that morning. As I poured out my story, Dr. Chen's expression shifted from concern to something that looked surprisingly like excitement. "Do you remember your final project proposal?" she asked suddenly. "The adaptive energy grid system?" I blinked, surprised she remembered. It had been my passion project, the one I'd abandoned when Marcus convinced me to switch majors. That was 15 years ago. And in those 15 years, nobody has solved the problem you were trying to address. She pulled out her tablet, quickly pulling up current research. In fact, it's become one of the biggest challenges in sustainable technology. The market is desperate for a solution. For the first time in months, I felt a familiar spark, the same one I'd had in college when tackling complex engineering problems. The technology would be completely different now, I mused, already thinking of improvements to my old design. Better technology, yes. But the fundamental problem? Still the same? She smiled. "And you, my dear, have something none of these young engineers have. 15 years of watching how successful businesses operate from the inside." That night, I dug through my boxes until I found my old project files. As I spread them across my tiny kitchen table, memories flooded back, not of dinner parties or charity galas, but of long nights solving equations, the thrill of innovation, the pure joy of creation. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Heard you're looking for work. Country Club needs a new event coordinator. Put in a good word for you." I looked at my old designs, then at his text. The perfectly polished trophy wife would have graciously accepted his help, grateful for the lifeline. But she wasn't here anymore. In her place sat a woman who was beginning to remember who she was before she became Mrs. Marcus Sterling. Instead of responding, I opened my laptop and began to research current energy technology. My hands shook slightly as I typed, but my mind was clearer than it had been in years. Dr. Chen was right. The problem still needed solving. And maybe, just maybe, the girl who dreamed of changing the world through technology wasn't completely gone after all. I worked through the night, fueled by cheap coffee and expensive determination. By morning, my kitchen table was covered in notes, my laptop screen filled with research tabs, and my heart racing with possibility. Marcus had been wrong about one thing. I understood business perfectly. I'd watched him build an empire for 15 years. Now it was time to build my own. I never realized how expensive it is to be poor until I actually became poor. Every decision, every purchase, every minute had to be calculated and optimized. I sold my designer wardrobe piece by piece on consignment, each Chanel suit and Gucci bag funding another week of survival. The pearls Marcus gave me paid for my first business plan consultant. The irony of using his gifts to fund my independence wasn't lost on me. Late nights became my sanctuary. While the rest of the city slept, I sat cross-legged on my apartment floor, surrounded by engineering textbooks borrowed from the library, desperately catching up on 15 years of technological advancement. My old college notes sat beside current research papers, the gap between them representing everything I'd given up to be the perfect wife. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'd been staring at my old energy grid designs, trying to adapt them to current technology, when everything clicked. The solution wasn't just about updating the technology, it was about completely reimagining how energy systems could work. All those years of hosting dinner parties for tech executives hadn't been wasted after all. I'd absorbed more than I realized about industry trends and market needs. My hands shook as I sketched out the new design. This wasn't just an improvement on my college project. This was something entirely new, something that could revolutionize how cities manage their energy consumption, something that could change everything. The next morning, running on coffee and adrenaline, I walked into the local bank where Marcus and I had been preferred customers for years. The same manager who used to fawn over us now looked at me with barely concealed pity as he reviewed my loan application. "Mrs. Sterling." "Miss Matthews," I corrected. I'd taken back my maiden name along with my independence. "Miss Matthews," he adjusted smoothly. "While your business plan is interesting, we typically require more than theoretical designs for a loan of this size. Perhaps if Mr. Sterling would co-sign." I walked out of the bank with my dignity intact and my resolve strengthened. In the coffee shop across the street, where I couldn't afford to buy anything, I overheard two women discussing venture capital funding. One of them, a sharp-dressed executive named Victoria Chen, was complaining about the lack of innovation in sustainable technology. Sometimes desperation breeds courage. I approached their table, my carefully preserved professional smile in place. "I couldn't help overhearing, 'I might have something you'd be interested in.'" Victoria's skepticism melted as I walked her through my designs. By the time our impromptu meeting ended, I had a real investor meeting scheduled and her business card in my hand. "You know," she said as I gathered my papers, "Marcus Sterling's company has been trying to get a meeting with me for months. Isn't he your ex-husband?" "Yes," I replied, straightening my last remaining designer blazer. "But I think you'll find my proposal more innovative than anything he's offering." That night, my phone lit up with a text from Marcus. "Heard your meeting with Victoria Chen. Cute. Word of advice: stick to what you know, Claire. Leave the real business to professionals." I smiled at my reflection in the apartment's scratched mirror. The woman looking back at me wasn't the polished society wife anymore. Her clothes were slightly worn, her makeup minimal, but her eyes blazed with purpose. Beside the mirror, taped to the wall, was a Forbes magazine cover featuring a female tech entrepreneur. Soon, I promised myself. Soon. The next morning, as I prepared for the investor meeting, my old engagement ring caught my eye. I'd been holding on to it, unsure why. Now I knew exactly what to do with it. By afternoon, I had my first office, a tiny rented space above a Chinese restaurant, and seed money from the ring's sale. The smell of Kung Pao chicken drifted up through the floorboards as I set up my laptop on a folding table. My phone buzzed again. Marcus. "Don't embarrass yourself with Victoria. I can still get you that country club job." I looked around my tiny office, at the designs spread across my makeshift desk, at the future I was building with my own hands. "Thanks," I typed back, "but I prefer the view from up here." Then I blocked his number and got back to work. After all, Forbes covers aren't won by playing it safe. 7 months after leaving Marcus, my office above the Chinese restaurant had transformed into a real startup. My team consisted of 3 brilliant engineers who shared my vision, working for equity because I couldn't afford salaries yet. Our prototype was held together with duct tape and determination, but it worked. That's all that mattered. Victoria Chen's investment had opened doors I didn't even know existed. Turns out, being Marcus Sterling's ex-wife carried a certain intrigue in the tech world. Everyone wanted to see what the former trophy wife was building in her little startup. Most came expecting to be amused. They left looking worried. "Your ex-wife is making waves," I overheard one of Marcus's board members say at a tech conference. I was presenting our prototype in the startup section while Marcus's company had the main stage. Her energy grid system could make our entire infrastructure obsolete. I smiled, remembering all the dinner parties where I'd sat quietly while men like him discussed business around me. Now they were discussing me, and I wasn't quiet anymore. The first major test of our system came when a small suburb agreed to pilot our technology. I stood in the control room at 3 a.m., watching as our grid system managed the entire neighborhood's energy consumption in real time. Tears streamed down my face as years of work, dreams, and determination culminated in this moment. "Mom, you need to see this," my assistant whispered, handing me her tablet. On screen was Marcus's latest press release. His company was announcing their own energy management system, suspiciously similar to our early designs that had been in my old engineering notebooks I'd left behind in his house. "He's trying to beat us to market," one of my engineers said, panic in his voice. "With his resources, he could—" "No," I interrupted, a calm certainty in my voice. "He has our old designs, but he doesn't have what makes them work. 15 years of watching his mistakes. Our system learns and adapts because I learned and adapted. His will fail because he never learned anything." I was right. 2 weeks later, Marcus's company demonstrated their system to potential clients. It failed spectacularly, causing a minor blackout in their test neighborhood. Our pilot program, meanwhile, had reduced energy consumption by 40% and was drawing attention from major cities. The coup de grace came during a major industry conference. I was scheduled to present right after Marcus's keynote speech. He strutted onto the stage, confident as ever, promising revolutionary changes in energy management. Then he saw me in the front row, reviewing my presentation notes. "Claire," he said during the quanda, his smile tight, "surprised to see you here. Isn't there a charity gala missing its organizer?" The audience chuckled uncertainly. I stood up, smoothing down my simple but elegant blazer, purchased with my first real profits, not his credit card. "Actually, Marcus, I'm here to present our successful pilot program results, but please finish telling everyone about your failed attempt to copy my original designs. It's a fascinating lesson in why understanding the technology matters more than just having the blueprints." The room went silent. Marcus's face flushed red. For the first time in our relationship, he had nothing to say. My presentation followed his. As I demonstrated our working system, showing real data from our pilot program, I could feel the room shift. These weren't people humoring the ex-wife anymore. These were potential clients, investors, and partners seeing the future of energy management. Afterward, Victoria Chen hugged me. "You didn't just prove him wrong," she whispered. "You proved yourself right." That evening, I returned to my small apartment, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop to find my inbox flooded with partnership offers. A notification popped up. Marcus had unblocked me on social media. His latest post showed his company's stock price dropping after our competing presentations. I closed the laptop, made myself a cup of tea, and looked at the Forbes magazine still taped to my wall. Soon, I thought again. But this time it wasn't a desperate promise to myself. It was a calm certainty. My phone rang, a major tech company wanting to discuss acquisition options. As I answered the call, I caught my reflection in the window. The woman looking back wasn't Marcus Sterling's ex-wife anymore. She was someone far more interesting, a force to be reckoned with. 1 year to the day after finding those divorce papers, I stood in my new corporate office on the 40th floor, watching Marcus's company's stock price plummet on my wall-mounted screen. My company, Matthews Energy Solutions, had just announced a partnership with 3 major cities to implement our smart grid system, the same cities that had rejected Marcus's copycat version. "Miss Matthews," my assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Marcus Sterling is here to see you, without an appointment." I smiled at my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Send him in." He looked different, smaller somehow. His custom suit couldn't hide the strain around his eyes, the slight slump in his shoulders. The man who once told me I'd never survive without him now stood in my office practically fidgeting. "Nice view," he said, trying to sound casual. "Better than my old office." "That's because it is your old office," I replied. "I bought the building last month. Your company's lease is up for renewal, by the way. I'm thinking of raising the rent." He sank into one of my visitor chairs without being invited. "That's actually why I'm here, Claire. This little competition between us, it's got to stop. You've made your point." I raised an eyebrow. "Point? Look, you've proven you can run a business. It's impressive. But this vendetta is hurting both our companies. Why don't we discuss a merger, for old time's sake?" I thought about the nights I'd spent crying in our mansion's kitchen, about the condescending pats on my head, about all the dreams I'd buried to fit into his world. Then I thought about my team downstairs, about our successful pilot programs, about the future we were building. A merger? I pretended to consider it. "You're right, it would solve both our problems. Your company's failing and I need more office space, but I prefer the term acquisition to merger, and I don't need your input to run things." His face reddened. "You can't be serious. I built my company over 20 years, and I built mine in one," I cut him off, "while teaching myself 15 years of technological advances I missed because you convinced me I was too pretty for engineering. Imagine what I could have built if you hadn't held me back." A knock at my door interrupted us. Victoria Chen entered, followed by several members of Marcus's board. Their faces told me everything I needed to know. The hostile takeover we'd been quietly orchestrating was ready to launch. "Marcus," one of his board members said awkwardly, "we didn't know you'd be here." "Why would you?" I smiled. "He doesn't own enough shares to be notified of board meetings anymore. Not since his largest investors jumped ship to join us." The color drained from Marcus's face as he realized what was happening. The board members he'd played golf with, the investors he'd wined and dined, they were all choosing his ex-trophy wife over him. "You can't do this," he whispered. "Actually, I can, and I am." I stood up, smoothing my dress. "Your board has agreed to my terms. As of next week, Sterling Industries will be a subsidiary of Matthews Energy Solutions. You can either stay on as a junior consultant or—" I paused, savoring the moment. "There's an opening for an event coordinator at the country club." He stormed out, leaving his board members behind. Through my office windows, I watched him get into his leased luxury car, the last vestige of his former wealth. Victoria squeezed my arm. "That was better than I imagined. But you're not done yet, are you?" "Not even close." I turned to my screens where our next project's designs glowed with promise. Getting revenge wasn't the goal. Changing the world was, and we're just getting started. That evening, as I left the office, a young intern stopped me. "Miss Matthews? I'm studying engineering, and your story, it inspired me to switch back from business after my boyfriend said tech wasn't for girls." I thought about the scared woman I'd been, packing her boxes in that mansion. "Never let anyone dim your light," I told her. "The world needs your brightness." My phone buzzed, a notification that Forbes wanted to schedule a cover shoot. The subject line read, "From Trophy Wife to Tech Titan, the reinvention of Claire Matthews." I smiled, thinking of the magazine covers in Marcus's old office. Soon he'd be seeing my face where his used to be. But more importantly, somewhere out there, another woman would see it and realize she too could rewrite her story. The day my Forbes cover hit newsstands, Marcus moved out of his luxury condo into a studio apartment. I didn't plan it that way. Life just has a poetic sense of timing. The article's headline read, "The Energy Revolution's Unexpected Leader, How Claire Matthews Transformed Personal Crisis into Professional Triumph." My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since dawn. Congratulatory messages, partnership offers, interview requests. But the message that caught my eye came from Marcus's 20-something girlfriend, the one he'd left me for. "Can we meet?" her text read. There's something you should know. We met at the coffee shop where my journey began, the one that had rejected my job application a year ago. She looked different from the confident homewrecker I'd imagined, smaller, nervous, clutching her designer handbag like a shield. "He's doing it again," she said without preamble. "The same thing he did to you, telling me I'm too pretty for medical school, that I should focus on supporting his career instead." She paused, twisting her napkin. "I saw your Forbes cover. It made me realize I don't want to become—" "Me?" I supplied. "The first version of me, you mean." She nodded, tears threatening to ruin her perfect makeup. "How did you do it? Start over?" I looked at this woman, barely more than a girl really, who'd unknowingly done me the biggest favor of my life by helping destroy my perfect prison. "First," I said, pulling out my laptop, "tell me about your medical school dreams. Then let me tell you about the scholarship program I'm launching for women returning to STEM fields." By the time our coffee went cold, I'd gained both a scholarship program's first recipient and an unexpected ally. Sometimes the people you think are your enemies are just characters in the same cautionary tale. Later that week, during a board meeting in my 40th floor office, my assistant interrupted with urgent news. Marcus's company was declaring bankruptcy. Our acquisition of his company had revealed years of creative accounting and hidden debts. His empire had been as much of a facade as our marriage. "Should we pull out of the deal?" my CFO asked. I thought about all the employees at his company, good people who'd been caught in Marcus's web of deception. "No," I decided. "We proceed as planned, but with a restructuring. Everyone keeps their jobs except the upper management that helped hide this mess." "And Marcus?" I smiled, remembering his condescending career advice. "Offer him a position in our mailroom, entry level. He could work his way up, if he's qualified." That evening, as I left the office, I saw him standing in the lobby, staring at my Forbes cover in the newsstand. He'd aged years in months, his expensive suit replaced by off-the-rack wear, his confident stance now uncertain. "Congratulations," he said as I passed, his voice hoarse. "You proved me wrong." I stopped, really looking at the man I'd once built my life around. "No, Marcus, you proved me right. I always had this potential. You just made me forget it for a while." "The mailroom position," he said quietly, "was that your idea of revenge?" "That was my idea of a second chance, something I never got from you." I adjusted my briefcase. "Take it or leave it, but remember, this time your success depends on your merit, not your manipulation." As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with another message. A young woman seeking advice about leaving her controlling husband to pursue her dreams. Then another and another. My story was creating ripples I'd never anticipated. That night, in my new penthouse apartment, I looked at my own Forbes cover, not taped to the wall this time, but professionally framed. The woman in the photo looked confident, powerful, completely self-possessed. But it was the quote they'd chosen that made me smile. "Success isn't about proving them wrong, it's about proving yourself right." I opened my laptop, beginning a book proposal my agent had been pushing for. Its working title, "From His Shadow to the Spotlight, A Guide to Reclaiming Your Power." Because sometimes the best revenge isn't just succeeding, it's showing others they can succeed too. The universe has a way of testing you right when you think you've made it. 2 years after my Forbes cover, at the height of Matthews Energy Solutions' success, our biggest competitor launched a smear campaign. Industrial espionage accusations, whispers about stolen technology, suggestions that my success was built on Marcus's stolen ideas. The source wasn't hard to guess. Marcus had been rejected from the mailroom position and disappeared, only to resurface as a consultant for our largest rival. My PR team wanted me to lay low, let our lawyers handle it. But I'd spent too many years being quiet, playing safe, letting others define my story. Instead, I called a press conference in our headquarters lobby, right next to the Forbes magazine display that still featured my cover. Yes, I was inspired by designs I created in college, I told the assembled reporters. Designs I abandoned when my ex-husband convinced me I wasn't smart enough for engineering. Designs that gathered dust while I played the role of perfect wife. But here's the difference. I didn't just copy old blueprints, I revolutionized them. Would you like to see how? I motioned to my team, and the lobby's lights dimmed. Holographic displays lit up, showing real-time data from every city using our smart grid system. Energy consumption patterns danced in the air, shifting and adapting as our AI made micro adjustments to maximize efficiency. This isn't just about power grids, I continued. It's about empowerment. Every city using our system has reduced their energy costs by 60%. Those savings are funding education programs, community initiatives, and yes, scholarships for women returning to STEM fields. The next day's headlines ignored the accusations entirely, focusing instead on our technology's impact. Marcus's attempt to discredit me had backfired, drawing attention to our success instead of our origins. But the real victory came a week later. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor, Marcus's former girlfriend, now Dr. Sarah Chen, having completed medical school with our scholarship's help. "I'm here to repay my debt," she said, placing a folder on my desk. "Marcus approached me 6 months ago, offered me money to testify that you stole his ideas. Instead, I recorded everything." She smiled. "I learned from the best about turning manipulation into opportunity." The evidence she provided didn't just clear our name. It exposed a coordinated attempt by our competitors to undermine emerging tech companies led by women. The resulting investigation shook up the entire industry, forcing overdue conversations about gender bias in technology. That evening, during a board meeting, we discussed expanding our scholarship program internationally. The numbers were staggering. 10,000 women had already returned to STEM careers through our initiative. Each one had her own story of being told she wasn't enough, couldn't succeed, should play smaller. "We're not just building a company anymore," I told my board. "We're building a movement." My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. "You've made your point. Name your price to end this." I thought about the women in our program, each one fighting her own battle against doubt and dismissal, about the cities transformed by our technology, about the young girls who'd never have to shrink themselves to fit someone else's expectations. "My price?" I typed back. "Keep watching. This isn't about you anymore. It never really was." Later that night, alone in my office, I found my old engineering notebook, the one that started everything. Its pages were worn, filled with the dreams of a young woman who didn't yet know her own strength. I added it to the display case in our lobby, next to the Forbes cover and the first prototype of our smart grid system. A custodian paused to look at the display. "My daughter wants to be an engineer," she said shyly. "She saw your story and finally believed she could do it." I thought about all the women still trapped in their own perfect prisons, believing the lies they'd been told about their worth, their potential, their place in the world. "Tell your daughter something for me," I said. "Tell her the world needs her brilliance more than it needs her compliance. Because sometimes success isn't measured in stock prices or magazine covers. Sometimes it's measured in the dreams you help others reclaim, in the paths you help others find, in the light you help others rediscover in themselves." 5 years after that first Forbes cover, I found myself back in the same photographer's studio. This time, I wasn't just Claire Matthews, the ex-trophy wife who made good. I was being named most influential person in green technology for transforming how cities across the globe consumed energy. The photographer wanted to recreate my first cover shot to show the contrast, but I had a different idea. "Let's shoot it in my old apartment," I suggested, "the one above the Chinese restaurant where it all started." The building owner had kept my old office exactly as it was, rent paid anonymously each month to preserve what he called the birthplace of an inspiration. The folding table where I drafted our first designs still stood in the corner, the walls still covered in my early sketches and calculations. As the photographer set up, my phone buzzed with an alert. Marcus had just been hired as a junior analyst at a small tech firm, starting salary less than what he used to spend on a single suit. The universe's sense of poetry never failed to amaze me. Miss Matthews, a young intern, interrupted my thoughts. There's a group of high school girls here for the mentorship program. They're early for their tour. I looked at the photographer. Give me 15 minutes. The girls huddled in the tiny space, eyes wide as they recognized me. But it wasn't their awe I wanted. I perched on my old folding table, now more valuable than the antique desk I'd left behind in my marriage. See this room? I asked them. 5 years ago, I sat here crying because my ex-husband said I'd never survive without him. I had no job, no recent experience, and a head full of engineering dreams everyone told me to forget. I paused, letting that sink in. Want to know what I did have? They leaned in, eager. Anger, the kind that fuels revolutions, and 15 years of watching someone else succeed while believing I couldn't. Turns out that was the perfect education in what not to do. One girl raised her hand timidly. But weren't you scared? Terrified, I admitted. But here's what I learned. Fear and faith use the same imagination. I just chose to imagine my success instead of my failure. After they left, the photographer captured something different than we'd planned. Me working at that humble folding table, surrounded by the sketches that had launched an energy revolution. The past and present merged in one frame, telling a story not just of success, but of transformation. That evening, I had a different kind of meeting. The tech firm that hired Marcus wanted to partner with us on a new project. Their representative? Marcus himself, now tasked with pitching ideas to the woman he'd once dismissed. He looked older, humbled. The designer suits replaced by department store clearance, his manicured hands clutching a presentation folder like a lifeline. Your ideas are good, I told him after his pitch, remembering all the times he'd patronizingly evaluated my suggestions. But they need work. Come back when you've developed them further. I deserve that, he said quietly. The irony isn't lost on me. This isn't about irony, Marcus, or revenge. It's about merit. Develop your ideas, make them better, earn your place, like I had to. As he left, my assistant handed me the final draft of my book. The cover showed my old engineering notebook next to the Forbes magazine, bridging the gap between who I was and who I'd become. From his shadow to the spotlight wasn't just my story anymore. It had become a blueprint for thousands of women breaking free from their own gilded cages. The advance copy reviews were already pouring in, each one a story of someone finding their power, reclaiming their dreams, rewriting their ending. Standing in my office that evening, watching the city lights flicker with power flowing through my smart grid system, I remembered the woman who once measured her worth by her husband's success. She felt like a stranger now, a cautionary tale transformed into an inspiration. My phone lit up with another message. The first scholarship recipient was now launching her own tech company. Then another, a domestic violence shelter using our technology to become energy independent, and another, a young girl who'd won her science fair with a project inspired by my story. Each message was a reminder that success isn't just about proving someone wrong. Sometimes it's about proving that everyone has the potential to be extraordinary if only they dare to step out of the shadows and into their own light. 10 years after finding those divorce papers, I stood on stage at the Global Women in Technology Summit, facing an audience of 5,000. The contrast wasn't lost on me. A decade ago, I'd been arranging seating charts for charity galas, and now I was the keynote speaker at the world's largest tech conference. Success isn't just about proving them wrong, I began, looking at the sea of faces. It's about proving yourself right. 10 years ago, my ex-husband told me I'd never survive without him. He was right about one thing. The woman he knew didn't survive. She became something far more powerful instead. In the front row sat Marcus, now working steadily up the ranks at his firm, watching his ex-trophy wife deliver the keynote speech at a conference his company couldn't even afford to sponsor. Life has a way of rearranging the pieces when you least expect it. The headlines that morning had announced Matthews Energy Solutions' latest breakthrough, an AI-powered grid system that could predict and prevent blackouts before they happened. Our stock had tripled overnight. But that wasn't what I wanted to talk about. Instead, I told them about the folding table above the Chinese restaurant, about the nights spent relearning engineering while selling designer clothes to pay rent, about the women who joined our scholarship program, each carrying their own dreams they'd been told to forget. Today, I'm announcing the launch of the Shadow to Spotlight Foundation, I revealed, a $5 billion commitment to help women reclaim their power, their dreams, and their potential, not just in tech, but in every field where they've been told to play small. The audience erupted, but my eyes found Marcus in the crowd. He nodded slightly, finally understanding. This had never been about revenge. It had been about revolution. Later that evening, at the gala celebration, Marcus approached me. "I've been reading your book," he said quietly. "I never realized. I never understood what I was doing to you." "The interesting thing about shadows," I replied, "is that they only exist where light is blocked. Move the obstacle and light fills the space naturally." My phone buzzed. Another city signing up for our smart grid system. Another scholarship recipient launching her company. Another woman finding her light. The next morning, in my office, I found an unexpected delivery. Inside was a familiar velvet box, the one that had once held the pearl necklace Marcus gave me for our 10th anniversary. But instead of jewelry, it contained a note. "Thank you for proving me wrong. The world is better for it." I added the box to our company museum, next to my old engineering notebook, the Forbes cover, and that first wrinkled divorce papers that had set everything in motion. Each item told part of the story, not just of one woman's journey from shadow to spotlight, but of every person who'd ever been told they weren't enough. 20 years after being told I'd never survive without him, I didn't just survive, I thrived. And more importantly, I showed others how to do the same. My company wasn't just changing how cities used energy, we were changing how women saw their own power. The final piece fell into place when Forbes asked me to guest edit their special issue on transformative leadership. The theme, "From Shadow to Spotlight, Revolutionaries Who Rewrote Their Stories." On the cover was a split image, my first corporate headshot as Marcus's wife, next to a recent photo of me in my CEO office. The headline read, "The Power of Being Underestimated." Marcus's studio apartment had a perfect view of our company headquarters, its energy-efficient lights glowing against the night sky. I heard he keeps every article about our success, every announcement of our expansion, every story about another woman we've helped find her way. They say living well is the best revenge, but I discovered something better. Living authentically is the best revolution. My story wasn't just about proving an ex-husband wrong. It was about proving that every shadow has the potential to step into the spotlight, if only they dare to take that first step. And somewhere out there, another woman is finding divorce papers, or being told she's not enough, or watching her dreams fade into shadows. To her, I say, "Welcome to the revolution. Your spotlight is waiting.